It was 2 a.m., pitch black, and I was completely alone in the middle of nowhere. My phone was dead. My flashlight had stopped working hours ago, and somewhere in the darkness around me, I could hear things moving through the underbrush, branches snapping, leaves rustling, the kind of sounds that make your blood run cold when you're defenseless and lost. But the worst part? The absolute worst part was knowing that my best friend of 15 years had planned this. Marcus hadn't just left me here by accident. He had deliberately abandoned me in these woods, taking everything, our car, our supplies, our tent, and leaving me to die. I crouched behind a fallen log, shivering in my thin t-shirt, trying to make sense of what had happened. Just 12 hours earlier, I'd been laughing with Marcus as we drove up the mountain for what was supposed to be the perfect guys' weekend, a celebration of my promotion at work, a chance to reconnect like old times. Instead, I was fighting for my survival because the person I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. Every sound made me jump, an owl hooting overhead, something large crashing through the trees in the distance. My imagination ran wild with thoughts of bears, mountain lions, or worse. I'd never felt so vulnerable, so completely helpless. The temperature was dropping fast and I could feel hypothermia setting in. My hands were numb. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering. If I didn't find shelter soon, I wouldn't make it through the night. But as terrifying as the physical danger was, the emotional devastation cut even deeper. Marcus and I had been like brothers. We'd grown up together, supported each other through everything. I would have died for him without hesitation. And apparently, he was perfectly willing to let me die for him. As I sat there in the freezing darkness, one question kept echoing in my mind. Why? What could possibly drive someone to do this to their closest friend? What had I done to deserve this? I had no idea that the answer would be so much worse than I could have ever imagined. Because this wasn't just about Marcus wanting to get rid of me for the weekend. This was about the person I loved most, the woman I was planning to propose to, and a betrayal so deep it would destroy everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up fighting for my life in those woods, you need to know the whole story. Marcus and I met when we were 8 years old. His family moved in next door to ours on Maple Street, and from the moment we laid eyes on each other, we were inseparable. We did everything together, built forts in the backyard, rode our bikes to the corner store for candy, played video games until our parents dragged us away from the TV. We were more than best friends. We were brothers in every way that mattered. Our families practically merged. Marcus's mom would pack extra sandwiches in his lunch for me. My dad taught Marcus how to throw a football in our front yard. We slept over at each other's houses so often that both sets of parents kept spare toothbrushes and pajamas for us. As we got older, that bond only grew stronger. When my parents divorced during my freshman year of high school, Marcus was the one who sat with me while I cried. When his dad lost his job and they almost had to move away, my family helped them with groceries and rent until he found work again. We went to prom with dates who were best friends just so we could double date. We applied to the same colleges. When I didn't get into state university but Marcus did, he deferred for a year so we could apply together again. That's the kind of loyalty we had. In college, we were roommates for 3 years. We pledged the same fraternity. We studied together, partied together, and when Marcus got his heart broken by his first serious girlfriend, I was the one who sat up with him all night, helping him get through it. After graduation, we got apartments in the same complex. We worked different jobs but always made time for our weekly guys' nights. Football on Sundays, poker with the crew on Fridays. We were each other's best men at our imaginary future weddings. When I met Sarah 2 years ago, Marcus was the first person I called to tell him about her. He was genuinely happy for me, asking all the right questions, wanting to meet her. When I introduced them at my birthday party, they got along perfectly. Sarah always said she was grateful I had such a loyal friend in my life. Marcus supported me through everything. When I was struggling at my first job and thinking about quitting, he talked me through it. When I got passed over for a promotion last year, he bought me dinner and reminded me of my worth. When my mom got sick, he drove 4 hours with me to the hospital and stayed in the waiting room all night. That's why what happened in those woods was so devastating. This wasn't just losing a friend. This was losing someone who had been the most constant, trustworthy presence in my life for 15 years. I genuinely believed Marcus would take a bullet for me. I knew I would for him. Turns out, I was the only one who felt that way. 3 weeks before the camping trip, I got the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. assistant manager at the marketing firm where I'd been grinding away as a junior account executive. It came with a significant raise, my own office, and finally, the financial stability to take the next step with Sarah. I called Marcus immediately after my boss delivered the news. "Dude, this is incredible," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "We need to celebrate properly, not just drinks at Murphy's like usual, something big." I was thinking the same thing, I replied. "Maybe a weekend trip somewhere?" "Actually," Marcus paused, "I've got the perfect idea. Remember how we always talked about doing a real camping trip? Like properly roughing it in the wilderness? We'd mentioned it in passing over the years, but always got distracted by easier plans. Hotel weekends in the city, beach trips with our friend group, the kind of vacations that didn't require sleeping on the ground." "You're serious?" I asked. "Dead serious. Just you and me, like old times. We'll find some remote spot, set up camp, disconnect from everything. It'll be perfect for celebrating your promotion and just reconnecting, you know?" The more he talked about it, the more excited I got. We'd both been so busy with work and relationships lately that our friendship had taken a back seat. A guy's weekend in nature sounded exactly like what we needed. "I'm in," I said. "Where are you thinking?" "Leave that to me," Marcus replied. "I'll find the perfect spot. Somewhere really secluded where we can just be ourselves." Over the next few weeks, Marcus took charge of all the planning. He researched locations, bought supplies, and handled the logistics. I offered to help multiple times, but he insisted he had it covered. "This is my gift to you," he said, "for your promotion and for being such an amazing friend all these years." I should have found his secrecy about the exact location strange. When I asked for coordinates so I could check it out on Google Maps, he said he wanted it to be a surprise. When I suggested we invite a couple other guys from our friend group, he insisted it should just be the two of us. "Trust me," he said with that familiar grin. "This is going to be the best weekend we've ever had." Looking back, there were red flags everywhere. Marcus was acting differently in the weeks leading up to the trip, more secretive, more distant. He'd get weird when Sarah was around, making excuses to leave early or changing the subject when she asked about the camping plans. But I trusted him completely. After 15 years of friendship, the idea that Marcus might betray me was literally unthinkable. I even bought him an expensive camping knife as a thank you gift for organizing everything. God, I was naive. The morning of our departure, Marcus picked me up at 6 a.m. sharp. His car was loaded with camping gear, tent, sleeping bags, cooking supplies, enough food for 3 days. Everything looked perfect. "Ready for the adventure of a lifetime?" he asked as I threw my backpack in the back seat. "Absolutely," I replied, settling into the passenger seat with my coffee. "So where exactly are we headed?" "You'll see," Marcus said, pulling out of my driveway. "But I guarantee you've never been anywhere like this before." The first few hours of the drive were completely normal. We listened to music, caught up on work gossip, and talked about everything and nothing. It felt like old times, just me and my best friend heading off on an adventure. But as we got deeper into the mountains, Marcus started acting strange. His phone kept buzzing with texts, and every time it did, he'd grab it immediately, even while driving. I offered to read them for him, but he declined. "Just work stuff," he said, but he was smiling at the screen in a way that didn't look like work at all. Around noon, we stopped at a gas station for snacks and bathroom breaks. While I was inside paying for chips and energy drinks, I noticed Marcus outside having what looked like an intense phone conversation. He was pacing back and forth, gesturing with his free hand, completely absorbed in whatever he was discussing. When I came out, he quickly ended the call and shoved his phone in his pocket. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, totally fine," he said, but he wouldn't make eye contact. "Ready to get back on the road?" As the afternoon wore on, the terrain became more and more remote. We were driving on unmarked dirt roads, passing fewer and fewer signs of civilization. The GPS on my phone lost signal, and when I mentioned it, Marcus just shrugged. "That's the point," he said. "Complete disconnection." But something felt off. Marcus kept checking his phone even though there was no service. He'd pull over every hour or so, claiming he needed to check the map, but I noticed he was actually trying to get his phone to connect to any available tower. When we finally arrived at our campsite around 4 p.m., I understood why he'd been so secretive about the location. We were in the middle of absolutely nowhere, No marked trails, no other campers, no cell service for miles in any direction. "How did you even find this place?" I asked, looking around at the dense forest surrounding us. "Online forum," Marcus replied quickly. "Hardcore camping enthusiasts recommended it." We set up camp efficiently. Marcus had clearly done his research on the logistics, but throughout the process, he kept walking away to scout the area or gather kindling, always taking his phone with him. Every time he returned, he seemed more agitated. As evening approached and we started preparing dinner over the campfire, I finally confronted him about his behavior. "Dude, what's going on? You've been acting weird all day." Marcus looked up from the can of beans he was opening, and for just a moment I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Guilt? Fear? I couldn't place it. "I'm fine," he said. "Just want everything to be perfect, you know?" But I could tell he was lying. After 15 years of friendship, I knew Marcus better than anyone. Something was definitely wrong. I just had no idea how wrong everything was about to go. As darkness fell, Marcus suggested we take a hike to gather more firewood. "The dead branches around our campsite aren't going to be enough for the whole night," he said, handing me what looked like a standard flashlight. "There's a grove about half a mile north that should have plenty of good kindling." It made sense. We'd used most of the easily accessible wood during our cooking process, and mountain temperatures drop fast after sunset. I grabbed the flashlight and followed him into the trees. "Let's split up to cover more ground," Marcus suggested after we'd walked for about 10 minutes. "You head east toward that ridge, I'll go west toward the creek. We'll meet back at camp in 30 minutes. "Are you sure?" I asked. The forest was getting really dark, and I wasn't thrilled about wandering around alone. "Maybe we should stick together." "Come on, man," Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "It's just wood gathering. What could go wrong?" I should have insisted we stay together. I should have noticed how eager he was to separate. I should have tested my flashlight before we split up. But I didn't. I headed east, clicking on the flashlight as I walked. It produced a weak, dim beam that barely illuminated 5 feet in front of me. I figured the batteries were dying and made a mental note to grab fresh ones from our supplies when I got back to camp. The first few minutes were productive. I found several good pieces of dry wood and started building a pile to carry back. But as I worked, the flashlight got dimmer and dimmer. By the time I'd collected enough kindling for the night, it was barely producing any light at all. I tried turning it off and on again. I smacked it against my palm. Nothing worked. The thing was completely dead. Standing there in the pitch-black forest, I felt my first real moment of unease. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The sounds of the forest, owls hooting, branches creaking, small animals rustling through the underbrush, seemed amplified and threatening. I called out for Marcus. No response. Using my phone's flashlight app, I tried to retrace my steps back toward camp, but the phone's LED wasn't designed for serious navigation, and after about 10 minutes of stumbling through trees and tripping over roots, I realized I was completely lost. That's when I started to panic. I called Marcus's name over and over, shouting as loud as I could. The only response was my own echo bouncing off the mountainside. I tried calling his phone, but of course there was no signal. After what felt like hours of wandering in circles, I finally saw the faint glow of our campfire through the trees. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled toward the light, ready to tell Marcus about my flashlight malfunction and my terrifying experience getting lost. But when I reached our campsite, Marcus wasn't there. Neither was anything else. The tent was gone, the cooking supplies were gone, our backpacks, the cooler with our food, the camping chairs, everything had vanished. Even the fire had been extinguished, leaving only cold ashes and a few still glowing embers. I stood there in shock, trying to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be right. Maybe I'd gotten turned around and found someone else's abandoned campsite. Maybe Marcus had packed everything up for some reason and moved to a better location. But then I saw our car keys lying in the dirt where our tent had been. Just the keys. Nothing else. And I knew. Marcus had left me here on purpose. This wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was planned. The broken flashlight, the suggestion to split up, the remote location with no cell service, it had all been deliberate. My best friend of 15 years had lured me into the middle of nowhere and abandoned me to die. As that realization hit me, I heard something large moving through the trees nearby, something that definitely wasn't human, and I was completely defenseless. The first rule of wilderness survival is don't panic. But standing alone in the freezing darkness, listening to unknown creatures moving through the forest around me, panic felt like the only reasonable response. I had no shelter, no food, no water, and no way to signal for help. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and I was wearing nothing but jeans, a t-shirt, and a light jacket. If I didn't find protection from the elements soon, hypothermia would kill me long before any wild animals got the chance. I gathered the dying embers from our extinguished campfire and tried to restart it using dry leaves and twigs. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the lighter, but eventually I managed to coax a small flame back to life. It wasn't much, but it provided some warmth and a tiny circle of light in the overwhelming darkness. The sounds of the forest seemed to close in around me, branches snapping in the distance, an owl's haunting call overhead, something large crashing through the underbrush maybe 50 yards away. Every noise sent adrenaline shooting through my system. Around 3 a.m., I heard what sounded like a pack of coyotes howling somewhere in the valley below. The sound echoed off the mountains, making it impossible to tell how close they were. I fed more wood to my pathetic fire and tried to make myself as small as possible. By 4 a.m., I was losing the battle against hypothermia. My core temperature had dropped dangerously low, and I couldn't stop shivering. I knew I needed to keep moving to generate body heat, but I was terrified of leaving the safety of my small fire. That's when I made the decision that probably saved my life. Instead of waiting for dawn, I started walking. I figured if I was going to die anyway, I might as well die trying to find help rather than freezing to death beside a dying campfire. I used the last of my phone's battery to navigate by the stars, heading what I hoped was downhill toward civilization. Every step was agony. My feet were numb, my legs felt like concrete, and I kept stumbling over roots and rocks I couldn't see. Somewhere around mile 3, I slipped on wet leaves and tumbled down a steep embankment, landing hard in an ice-cold creek. The shock of the frigid water hitting my already hypothermic body nearly knocked me unconscious. I crawled out of the stream, soaking wet and shaking uncontrollably. That's when I saw the light. It was faint and distant, but it was definitely artificial light. A building. I forced my frozen legs to carry me toward it, driven by pure desperation. The Clearwater Forest Ranger Station appeared through the trees like a miracle. I pounded on the door with numb fists until Ranger Patterson answered, took one look at my condition, and immediately brought me inside. "Jesus Christ, son, what happened to you?" he asked, wrapping me in blankets and starting coffee. I told him everything. The camping trip, Marcus abandoning me, the night of hell I'd just survived. Ranger Patterson listened with growing concern, then made a phone call to report my situation to local authorities. But that's when he told me something that changed everything. "Your friend Marcus," Patterson said carefully. "He came by here yesterday around 5 p.m. Said you'd had some kind of argument and stormed off into the woods. He seemed real worried about you." I stared at him. "That's not what happened." "I know," Patterson said quietly. "Because he wasn't alone." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "He had a young woman with him. Pretty girl, dark hair. Said she was his girlfriend. They were both asking about the nearest hotel." The world started spinning. I knew exactly who Patterson was describing. "Sarah. My girlfriend Sarah. They seemed close," Patterson continued, clearly uncomfortable. "Real close, if you know what I mean." That's when it all clicked into place. The secretive phone calls during our drive, Marcus's strange behavior over the past few weeks, his insistence that this trip be just the two of us. He hadn't just abandoned me in the woods to die, he'd done it so he could be with my girlfriend. Ranger Patterson didn't just save my life that morning. He helped me uncover the full scope of Marcus and Sarah's betrayal. "I've got security cameras here at the station," he said after I explained the real situation. "Let me pull up yesterday's footage." The video was devastating. There was Marcus at 5:15 p.m., looking relaxed and happy, with his arm around Sarah's waist. They were laughing together, completely comfortable with each other in a way that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. This wasn't a new relationship. They'd clearly been together for months. But it got worse. Patterson's cameras had audio capability, and we could hear their conversation as they approached the ranger station. Sarah was saying something about being glad that's finally over, and Marcus responding that he'll be fine, he's tougher than he looks. They were talking about me, about leaving me to die in the wilderness like it was just an inconvenience they'd finally dealt with. I need to call the police, I told Patterson, but he was already ahead of me. Already did, he said. They're on their way, but there's something else you should see. He handed me his phone. Your friend left his number with me yesterday, in case you turned up. I think you should call him. With shaking hands, I dialed Marcus's number. It went straight to voicemail, but the outgoing message was like a knife to the heart. Hey, you've reached Marcus. I'm out of town with my girlfriend this weekend, so leave a message and I'll get back to you Monday. His girlfriend. He was calling Sarah his girlfriend on his voicemail message. When the police arrived an hour later, they took my statement and immediately began investigating. Detective Rodriguez explained that what Marcus had done could constitute reckless endangerment, a felony that carried serious prison time. We'll need to gather evidence, she said. Phone records, text messages, any communications between them that show premeditation. That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. 3 weeks ago, right after I got my promotion, I'd given Sarah the password to my phone because she wanted to add some photos from her phone to mine. She'd had complete access to my messages, my contacts, my entire digital life, including my conversations with Marcus about planning this camping trip. Detective Rodriguez obtained warrants for both of their phones, and what they found was worse than I could have imagined. Text messages going back 8 months, detailing their affair and their growing resentment of me. Photos of them together at restaurants, hotels, even in my apartment when I wasn't there. But the most damning evidence was a text thread from the week before our camping trip. Marcus. Still think this is too risky. What if something actually happens to him? Sarah. You said yourself the place is remote but not actually dangerous. He'll find his way out eventually. Marcus. And if he doesn't? Sarah. Then we won't have to worry about him anymore, will we? They had planned this together. Not just the affair, but my abandonment. They'd calculated exactly how to get me out of the picture for their romantic weekend, and they genuinely didn't care if I survived or not. The police also discovered that I wasn't their only victim. They'd been systematically lying to friends and family for months, creating elaborate cover stories for their time together. Several of our mutual friends admitted they'd suspected something but hadn't wanted to get involved. The betrayal wasn't just from Marcus and Sarah, it was from an entire network of people who'd chosen to stay silent while I was being deceived. As Detective Rodriguez explained the charges being filed, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the cold satisfaction of justice being served. Marcus and Sarah had gambled with my life for their convenience. Now they were about to discover what real consequences looked like. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within a week, Marcus was arrested and charged with reckless endangerment and conspiracy. Sarah faced charges as an accessory. Both were released on bail, but the damage to their lives had already begun. I'll never forget the look on Marcus's face when the police showed up at his apartment. Ranger Patterson had given me the address where they'd registered at the hotel, and I was there when Detective Rodriguez made the arrest. Marcus saw me standing behind the officers, and for a moment, genuine fear flashed across his face. "Tom, please," he said as they cuffed him. "I can explain everything." But there was nothing to explain. The evidence was overwhelming. The text messages, the surveillance footage, the testimony from the hotel staff who'd seen them together. It all painted a picture of two people who'd been planning my demise for months. Sarah tried a different approach. She called me crying the next day, begging me to drop the charges. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she sobbed into the phone. "We never wanted you to get hurt." "You left me to die in the woods," I replied calmly. "What exactly did you think would happen? We knew you'd find your way out. Marcus said you were good at that stuff." The delusion was breathtaking. They'd convinced themselves that abandoning someone in unmarked wilderness without supplies or communication was somehow not attempted murder. As news of the CA spread, both of their lives began to unravel in spectacular fashion. Marcus lost his job within days. His employer, a family-owned construction company, couldn't afford the negative publicity of having a would-be murderer on their payroll. His parents, who'd known me since I was 8 years old, publicly disowned him. His younger sister called me personally to apologize and tell me she'd testify against him if needed. Sarah's life imploded even faster. Her family was devastated when they learned what she'd done. Her father, who'd always treated me like a son, came to my apartment to apologize in person. Her mother blocked Sarah's phone number and changed the locks on their house. But the most satisfying part was watching their relationship destroy itself under pressure. Within 2 weeks of their arrest, they were turning on each other. Sarah claimed Marcus had manipulated her into the plan. Marcus insisted Sarah had been the mastermind. Their lawyers were arguing with each other, their families were feuding, and their perfect romance was revealed to be nothing more than mutual selfishness and cowardice. The story went viral on social media when a local news station picked it up. Best friends betray man, leave him to die for love triangle was trending on Twitter for 3 days. Marcus and Sarah were getting death threats from strangers around the country. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life. The near-death experience had clarified something important. I'd been surrounding myself with people who didn't truly value me. Not just Marcus and Sarah, but the entire friend group that had known about their affair and stayed silent. So I started over. I joined a hiking club and met people who actually cared about each other's safety. I started dating again and found someone who treated me with genuine respect. I changed jobs and discovered coworkers who had integrity. 6 months after that nightmare in the woods, Marcus pled guilty to reckless endangerment and received 2 years in prison. Sarah pled guilty to conspiracy and got 18 months probation and community service. But their real punishment wasn't the legal consequences. It was watching me thrive while their lives fell apart completely. A year after that night in the forest, I was sitting in my new apartment, planning a weekend camping trip with my girlfriend Emma and our hiking club friends. Real friends who actually cared about my well-being. The irony wasn't lost on me. The experience that was supposed to destroy me had actually made me stronger than I'd ever been. Emma was nothing like Sarah. Where Sarah had been manipulative and secretive, Emma was honest and transparent. She'd given me access to her phone without being asked, introduced me to her family immediately, and made sure I felt secure in our relationship from day one. "I can't imagine betraying someone I love," she said when I first told her my story. "That's not love. That's sociopathy." The hiking club had become like a second family. These were people who understood that outdoor adventures required trust, communication, and genuine care for each other's safety. We'd done dozens of trips together, and I'd never once worried about being abandoned or betrayed. My new job was thriving too. The marketing firm I'd joined after leaving my old company actually valued loyalty and integrity. When they heard about what had happened to me, they made it clear that kind of behavior would never be tolerated in their workplace. Meanwhile, Marcus and Sarah's lives had continued their downward spiral. Marcus got out of prison after 18 months but couldn't find steady work. His criminal record made him unhireable in his field, and his reputation in our hometown was destroyed. He'd moved 3 states away and was working king retail jobs, living in a studio apartment, completely isolated from everyone who'd once cared about him. Sarah had fared slightly better legally but worse socially. Her family had eventually forgiven her, but she'd lost most of her friends and had to start over in a new city. She'd tried reaching out to me several times through mutual acquaintances, wanting to make amends, but I had no interest in reopening that chapter of my life. The most satisfying part was discovering that their relationship had lasted exactly 3 weeks after their arrests. Turns out, a romance built on lies and betrayal isn't sustainable when real pressure hits. They'd broken up in spectacular fashion, each blaming the other for ruining their lives. Neither of them had found lasting happiness since. According to mutual friends who still kept tabs on them, both were struggling with relationships, careers, and mental health. The consequences of their actions had followed them everywhere. Meanwhile, I was planning a proposal. Emma and I had been dating for 8 months, and I'd never been more certain about anything in my life. She was kind, honest, loyal, and made me feel valued in ways I'd never experienced before. We'd already talked about marriage, kids, building a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. The engagement ring was hidden in my sock drawer, and I was planning to propose during our next camping trip, a redemptive return to the wilderness that had once nearly killed me. But this time, I'd be surrounded by people who would never abandon me. People who actually deserved my trust. People who understood that love means protecting each other, not destroying each other for personal gain. Marcus and Sarah had thought they were taking my life away from me that night in the forest. Instead, they'd given me the chance to build a life worth living. If you're watching this and you've experienced a betrayal like mine, I want you to know something important. You're going to survive this. I know it doesn't feel that way right now. I know the pain feels unbearable and the violation of trust seems impossible to overcome. I know you're questioning everything about yourself and wondering how you could have been so blind to the truth. I've been exactly where you are. The night I was abandoned in those woods, I thought my life was over. Not just because of the physical danger, but because the betrayal had shattered something fundamental inside me. How could I ever trust anyone again? How could I believe in friendship or love when the people closest to me had been willing to let me die for their convenience? But here's what I learned. The betrayal said nothing about my worth and everything about their character. I hadn't been stupid or naive for trusting Marcus and Sarah completely. That's what you're supposed to do with people you love. The problem wasn't my capacity for trust, it was their capacity for deception. The healing process wasn't easy. I went through months of therapy, working through the trauma and learning to trust my instincts again. I had to rebuild my entire social circle from scratch. I had to learn the difference between healthy vulnerability and dangerous naivety. But most importantly, I had to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. If you're going through something similar, please remember, this is not your fault. You are not responsible for other people's cruelty. You are not stupid for believing the best in people you love, and you are absolutely not broken beyond repair. The people who betrayed you will face consequences, whether legal, social, or karmic. Marcus and Sarah lost everything that mattered to them, their families, their friends, their reputations, their futures. They traded a lifetime of regret for a few months of selfish pleasure. But more importantly, their betrayal freed you from relationships that were never serving your best interests. It cleared the way for genuine connections with people who actually deserve your loyalty. The life I have now is better than anything I had before that night in the forest. I'm surrounded by people who truly care about me. I'm in a relationship built on honesty and mutual respect. I have friends who would never abandon me, personally or professionally. I never would have found any of that if Marcus and Sarah hadn't shown me their true colors. So to anyone who's been betrayed by people they trusted, give yourself time to grieve, but don't give up on human connection entirely. There are good people out there who will treat your heart with the respect it deserves. And to anyone watching who's considering betraying someone who trusts you, don't. The temporary satisfaction isn't worth the permanent consequences. The damage you'll do to yourself will be far worse than anything you might gain. Choose people who choose you back. Surround yourself with loyalty and integrity. And never ever sacrifice your values for people who don't deserve them. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later. Tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a betrayal like this? How did you rebuild your life afterward? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your stories. Because we're all in this together, and nobody should have to face betrayal alone.